All right, let's do this. So then, thank you guys. For those of you who are here, Ms. V is still wrapping up her keynote, and I'm assuming that when that's done, she had a very powerful story. But when she's done, I'm assuming we might get some more folks into this session here today. This session is about seeing and decoding consent messages in media. I'm Samantha Macedo. I am the Vice President of Prevention and Outreach for Partnership Against Domestic Violence. As Nancy mentioned, we're one of the local domestic violence here in Georgia, in Atlanta, Georgia, and we're one of the largest ones in the state. Other than that, in my position, I get to manage this program, the Teen Dating Violence Prevention Program, and it's an absolute pleasure to do that with Jenny, who is behind the scenes and throughout the event today, and Taylor, who is right there on the screen.
Sure,
so Taylor, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor Shropshire. I'm the Teen Empowerment Advocate here at Partnership Against Domestic Violence. I have the immense pleasure of going into the community and teaching people about healthy relationships and warning them of the dangers of teen dating violence. I also have the immense privilege of running our Teen Advisory Board, which is a awesome collection of high school students who have joined us in the movement to end teen dating violence. They're a great group of high school students, and they always just help us do our jobs better and, keep us relevant and make sure that we're doing the things that the teenagers need to do, need to hear. It's me.
Thank you, Taylor. So yeah, we are very excited to be here today. Just as a general, guidelines to get us through the session. Taylor, do you want to do this part maybe? I don't know if you've done it before, but since you're kind of managing the room, did you want to talk a little bit about what we want to do
absolutely.
as far as guidelines?
So there are some things that we like to touch on since we're on a digital platform now. If you are joining the session now, we do ask you to keep your mic muted so we don't have any feedback and we can all pay attention to the speaker and whatever we're talking about. There are going to be moments when you can unmute yourself and we can all have a conversation. But just to keep things easy, we would like everyone to be muted for now. We really encourage you guys to chat in the chat. And there's also a poll up right now. We're trying to see if we have more adults or young people right now. And yeah, so just anytime you have any thought, any question, just go ahead and put it in the chat. We do have a chat moderator who is going to keep track of those questions for us. So every question will be addressed at the end of the session. We encourage you all to react and do thumbs up or just let us know how you're feeling as well. This is a safe space and we open the chat and the entire session for any questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question or a question that's not worth answering. We're going to answer everything. Every single question is valid. Every thought you have is valid. And also, we've all been experiencing and going through this virtual world. So just be mindful of what is going on in your room and what's behind you or anything like that. But also, we also want to open up the floor for anyone who has any other guidelines. So if you have anything that you want to make sure everyone else is participating in or the type of behavior that you would like to see, feel free to drop that in the chat as well. And we will make sure to respect your boundaries.
Awesome. Thank you, Taylor. And so today, what we're here to learn about is really to define what consent is. And we know that we consume media in several different ways through our tablets. We watch TV shows, we watch videos on YouTube, we watch not just, the old TV media. It's not just the only source of of how we consume media. We do it in several different ways. Right now, we can't go to the big screen movies, but we can watch any kind of media from all of our devices available. And so there's all this consumption of media, and it's through very different devices. And this media brings us a lot of sexual situations. These are very, very common in media. But we also, part of what we want to do here today is that in that media that we receive, that we consume, hardly ever consent is negotiated in a healthy way on screen. So in this workshop, we wanted to have the discussion on how to think critically about what we're seeing, and then identify ways in which we may want to behave differently or talk to other people about what's going on and in the media we're consuming. So those are the objectives. We're very thankful for the lesson that from Planned Parenthood, which this workshop is based on. And we are ready to jump right on.
I'm sorry. I'm going to pause you for like 30 seconds. The keynote is about to end,
Sure.
so I think a lot more people are going to be joining in just a second. So we might need to reiterate just a tiny bit. Yeah, because I want to have as many people as possible here.
Yes. So what I can do is maybe at the end I can go back to the objectives and kind of re-summarize them. If that's okay
cool
with everyone.
Me. It seems I'm just watching on another screen, and Jeff is asking a lot of questions. So
So Jeff, our moderator, he's always intrigued about the stories. I think he naturally perceives the storytelling and the concepts that he instinctively thinks the audience will want to know about. So I know that he usually has a lot of questions about, especially when he hears a story that captures him. So yeah, that I can visualize that happening.
I definitely feel the same way. Like the best part about what we do is actually interacting with people and hearing their stories, and most importantly, especially someone like Miss V, like just an act of, like a very powerful act of resilience and survival, and the fact that that they can get out of these sorts of situations. So I definitely hear that as well. Some of my favorite parts of this job are talking to people and, being a resource, which is the most important part. So yeah, I can turn into a chatterbox as well most of the time. I definitely feel that. Yeah. Cool. So I'm looking at our poll right now, and it seems like we are all, we have a bunch of adults, which is great because this is so important for everyone to hear. I really love that we have so many adults with us today. Lots of people hear Teen Summit and they think it's just a youth event, but no, this is a really important event for everyone, and this is information that can help anyone. If you have a child, if you have a niece or a nephew, or if you just engage with youth in general. So that's really cool.
Absolutely. I think that's helpful to know, because then this workshop here today will definitely be helpful if you're connected with a teen, whether you are the parent of a teen or the teacher of a teen or a mentor, and how to talk to young people about, again, how consent is being displayed or taught actually to us through media. And Taylor, I found this stat last night that I thought was really interesting, that 38% of people learn about consent from media. And it kind of goes along with what you and I have been talking and preparing for this workshop. We've been talking about, kind of like what's the culture around consent and how, we should all be helping in building a culture of consent that is a lot healthier than what we have now. That really speaks, that stat really, kind of fell very much in line what we've been discussing, that a lot of people learn about consent from media, even though it's not very realistic or healthy. Which is, again, the conversation we'll
What was
have
that number again?
today.
You said 38%?
38%.
Wow, that's a
Yes.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah. It says 38% of people learn about consent from TV and film. And it's from the a survey of 2,000 people for the Sexual Health
Wow.
Week in 2018. Yeah, it was really interesting to see that, because that's kind of what we've been talking about, what you and I have been talking about, and so that was really really good to see that. All right, so do we want to jump into this activity here? So again, if you're just joining us, we're talking about how consent is portrayed in media. And so our first exercise is about talking. If you guys can put in the chat, what was the last TV show or movie that you watched that had some sexual tension? And if you can, if you have the fast fingers, to just put it in the chat. So what happened? So mention the. If you want, I mentioned the TV show or the movie, and what scene are you referring to, where there was a sexual situation. So Taylor, do you want to talk about one of them, the last, or any of them? It doesn't have to be the last one, but any of them, any movie that you watched that had some kind of sexual
Sure.
tension.
So one of my favorite shows that I think I've watched it all the way through like 2 times now is actually a show called Sex Education, which is a great show for this topic. But it's about a young man who is going through puberty, and he's trying to engage in sexual activity and things like that, and he's really nervous about it. And he meets up with this girl, and they both want to do the same thing, but they're kind of awkward, and they're just like looking at each other across from the room, and they like the girl keeps asking, can we do this? Can we do this? Can I touch you here? Can I do this? And so that was a really positive example of consent. And eventually the boy gets really uncomfortable and doesn't want to do anything anymore. And so they just stop. That's great. But it's a really great example of verbal consent, and they keep asking questions and they keep checking in with each other until eventually someone's not comfortable, and then that is a very obvious example of consent, or not wanting to engage anymore. What about you, Samantha? What's the last thing that you saw that had to do with any sort of sexual content?
So I was looking at the Frozen, actually. I was watching Frozen. I'm a big animation movies fan, and also I like most of Disney movies. And even through Disney movies, this whole idea of sexual tension and consent has progressed very differently, where, as you mentioned, Taylor, we are seeing a bit more of positive consent, the consent portrayed in a healthy and positive way more recently in media. But when you look back, the classic movies, I love the classics as well, the black and whites, and some of them have very problematic consent situations. But Frozen, there's some very there's like sexual tension right off the bat, and it's actually the way that it kind of plays out in a very classic movie kind of way, and then it's kind of pointed out that it's kind of silly and ridiculous. Did you got engaged to someone that you met today? Like how does that happen? And that used to happen all the time in classic movies, right? So I was thinking of Frozen, and I watched a little bit of Frozen last night, particularly because there is a kiss in there at the end, and where he says, oh, I could kiss you. And he lifts her in the air and then realizes, oh, wait, I like to kiss you. and and
Mhm.
may I? And he stumbles through it. And then she says, yes, you may. And then she kisses him in the cheek, and then he kisses her on the lips. So I thought that was a kind of cute way to kind of point to the fact that, yeah, we used to do this very differently, but in today's, how we, I gave you
Mhm.
consent, like, may I kiss you? And she said yes.
Hey,
That
I
was cute.
want to mention it looks like
Um,
we're getting a bunch
so
more people. So hello everyone. Um, welcome to the Seeing and Decoding Consent workshop. If you're just now joining us, I did put up a poll. I kind of want to see if we have more adults or young people, so we can kind of steer the conversation in a more relevant way that can help you a lot. So go ahead and check that out next to the chat. It's on the right side, and we can keep going. Again, thank you guys so much for joining us just now. We've just been chatting a little bit about some examples of consent or not consent that we have seen in the media. We're talking about some movies and some TV shows. So if you guys have any examples, like anything that you just saw in like the last movie that you watched or the last TV show or something that you're watching right now, go ahead and drop those in the chat, and then we can discuss those a little bit. Samantha was just talking about an example of consent that she saw in the movie Frozen. So I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with that movie. I believe the second one just came out recently. Okay,
yes, I missed
cool.
the first one.
Awesome.
Yes, you're
But
right.
yeah, if you guys have any examples, just go ahead and put them in the chat and we can talk through those together.
Right. So we talked a little bit about the last scene, what happened, and then we kind of covered the second question. Do you think the sexual contact was wanted by both people? I think both of our examples kind of
Mm-hmm.
reflect that, where one person stated, hey, I want to do this, I want to kiss you, and then the other person either
Mm-hmm.
consented or didn't, right? Uh, or they did until they didn't. So both of our scenarios kind of highlight that, and I think again it does point to the fact that more recently in media we're starting to see a bit more of those scenes, whereas before the media usually portrayed a very problematic kind of way of
Mm-hmm.
portraying consent, right? And then, oh, this is a good question. So, how could you tell that it was that it was wanted, that consent was given? What about your
So my
scene, Taylor?
scene was it was very verbal and they kept asking each other. It wasn't, it was more like, can I touch you? Can you remove an article of clothing? Can I kiss you? Can I hug you? Things like that. So it was very verbal. And then at one point, one of the partners got extremely physically uncomfortable, and that was very obvious. And then they stepped away from each other. So that was a very, very, like they could just tell by looking at each other and also by checking in verbally to see if they wanted to continue. What about your scene? What did you see?
So in my scene, it was also very verbal. Both of them. He said in the scene from Frozen, where they kiss, he said, I could kiss you. And then he kind of realizes that he just said what he just said. And then he says, I'd like to kiss you, man, maybe. And he stumbles through it. And then she smiles and says, yes, you may. So there was, yes, it was very verbal, but at the same time, there was some physical, there was some body language that went along with it, right? The smile, the excitement of he lifted her up in the air. So there was some body language that went into it, but it was definitely very clearly a verbal request and a verbal consent. How about, do we have anybody on the chat put any scenes where consent, the recent sexual situation that you guys might have seen on media, on a TV show or on a movie, and what exactly happened, and if you think that there was a sexual if there was consent.
Hey, I think we just got one. Someone was watching Black Panther and there was a surprise kiss at the end, and she pulls back and says, I almost died, and they both smile and she kisses him back. So that was an example of a not consensual example in a movie. And I actually haven't seen Black Panther, so I know. I'm considering recent events. I need to watch it, just, but yeah, so that was an example of a non-consensual interaction. Absolutely, yeah. If someone immediately pulls back and it's like an automatic response, then you can definitely take that as an example of non-consent. Which goes into a question that Beth had earlier, which is consent always verbal? So that is an example of how consent is not always verbal. Do you have any other examples of that, Samantha?
When consent is not verbal? I think, oh, yes. So there was a scene in, because I recently watched Booksmart. And in the movie Booksmart, Amy is one of the main girls. Amy starts getting together with another girl who had been, and let's call her Mean Girl because I don't remember her name. But she had been mean to Amy. And so Amy and the Mean Girl start like, they're in the bathroom and start hooking up, and so they kiss, and then the Mean Girl starts removing her clothes, and then Amy helps her, and they're smiling through it. So I think that's a sign of consent, that maybe it's not verbal, but it's more based on body language, where they're both helping in removing the clothes, right? And then the scene progresses in a way that I think Taylor and I talked a little bit about this, because the scene progresses in a way where they both kind of check in with each other. But there's definitely a lot of so verbal consent plays on later on, but in the beginning there was kind of body language kind of consent. I think the clearest way in which you can get consent is through a verbal confirmation. I think at some point, another scene that comes to mind is the Big Bang Theory. In the Big Bang Theory, Sheldon has been dating another Amy for quite some time before he decides to get physical with her and physically intimate, and so he tells her that he's ready for the relationship to be physically intimate, and I think those are the words he uses. And so Amy's very excited and kisses him, and then Sheldon steps back and says, I'm gonna need a verbal confirmation. And which I think is yes, it's funny, but also very true. The best way to get consent is through a verbal confirmation, even though body language kind of plays into it. But at some point, you are going to
right. Absolutely, I definitely agree. You're both going to have a better time if you are clear about your intentions and what the goal of that experience is. Yeah, most definitely.
So let's look at the scenes that the people have been sharing in the chat, and that Taylor and I have been bringing up, and talk about how realistic are these scenes that are being portrayed in media. Are they realistic, or do they feel kind of like scripted and fantasy and entertainment and all of that, right? So if you guys want to put in the chat, realistic or what, unrealistic, realistic or entertainment. So how realistic are the scenes? We kind of already talked about all the verbal and nonverbal cues that are involved in consent. And also, did you learn anything about it? About those scenes that we've been that you offered? Was there anything that you learned about it?
Alexandra says, I think the Frozen one is realistic. Okay.
Ah, nice. Yes. Yeah, I like to kiss you. May I? May we? I stumbled, and sometimes I do that for laughs. But yeah, it can absolutely be realistic. Um, so let's see. So next, we wanted to really define consent. As we mentioned, there's a lot of models of in the media of consent that aren't very good. And often, Taylor, when Taylor and I were preparing for this workshop, we were thinking, actually, I can't think of a movie or a TV show where there isn't any sexual tension. So the amount of sexual tension scenes that we're getting is quite a bit. And for them to be not, when they're not good models of consent is a bit concerning. We just have to be, we have to watch critically, right? And be aware that that's what's going on. Um, so yeah, because there's just basically a lot of models. We don't have a lot of models on how to respectfully ask someone if they want to have sex, or how to tell someone that we do or that we don't want to have sex. And so that makes it very difficult. Is For those of you who just joined earlier, I shared a stat that said how 38% of people learn about consent from the media we consume. So it begs the question, right? So then how do you know when someone wants to have sex with you? And as we said earlier, there's only one way, and that's with a verbal a verbal confirmation. They need to tell you. And to move forward, you need to have consent, right? So what does consent really mean? Consent means that both parties are really into what's about to happen. This means that nobody is being bullied or guilted or pressured into doing anything. And silence does not equal consent. Communication doesn't always happen with words, as we were talking about. There's body language that you have to pay attention to, right? And then what does that mean? So body language, are they leaning in, or are they pulling away? I think Taylor, you mentioned a scene in which um, there was the body language said, I'm uncomfortable with this, and they both stepped away. Do they look happy, right? Are they smiling, or do they look like they're in pain? Do they look like they're uncomfortable? Are they kissing you back, or are they just standing still? So you have to pay attention to all the signals, including the words that are being said. And we'll talk a little bit more about what words can actually be said during those situations. But the important thing here is that no one can read minds. And so it's always good to talk about it. Asking for consent doesn't have to be awkward. Asking for consent can actually be, sexy. So it's important that to check in with, your partner, with whoever it is that you're engaging with, and check in about what's about to happen, right? Because everyone has to feel free to be able to say no and to stop without being pressured or hassled. If the other person is drunk or high or asleep, they cannot provide consent. And it's not cool to guilt trip the other person into because they want to stop. Number 3, be honest. As much as honest as you would like the other person to be, if if you're not the only person that they're sleeping with, if they have an STD, if are they on birth control? I think if you will want someone to be honest with you about those things, then you also be honest with them about those things. Number 4, saying yes once doesn't mean that you're saying yes forever. It's hard to pause, especially if you've already had sex before. It may be hard to pause in the middle of it. But if your partner is not feeling quite comfortable, doesn't feel quite right about what's going to happen, then they have the right to stop at any time.
I think something to emphasize is that just because it's happened before doesn't mean you automatically have permission to do it again. And also, you can be in the middle of something and you can still say no. Like, just because just because the car is moving doesn't mean the car can't stop. You know what I mean? So you can definitely say no at any time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this next point really, I think they go hand in hand, because when you are engaging in a physical event, in a sexual event with someone, it's important. It's all about connection, right? And connection is about communication and caring about that other person and what they're experiencing, right? If everyone feels respected, then the sex will be much better for both of you, and you both deserve a safe and pleasurable experience, right? So the more respect you show the other person, the more they will trust you, the more they will relax and enjoy the moment, and the more honest you are about what you want and don't want, then the better things will go, right? So that's what that last point is about prioritizing the connection that you're having with this person. Anything else you want to add?
No,
Taylor?
I just want to say that these are all such great points, and I'm looking at our poll right now, and it seems like we have 85% adults in this session right now. So this is really a great,
Okay.
all of those tips that you just said, these are really great things to bring up as soon as possible with any young person that's in your life.
I'm also looking at our time. I think our time is running short. So I am going to try to go faster through this last few slides. So in summary, if you need a summary, so again, since we have a lot of adults here, hope that I can give you the tools on how to talk to young people about it and how to unpack what's happening in media. And if you need a nice, cool acronym, here it is, FRIES. Consent is freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. So you can use this. I'm not sure who came up with it. Was it Planned Parenthood?
So. Also, just quick update. We're good until 12:55. So, yes, yeah.
Oh, excellent!
We're adjusting
all right.
a little bit.
Don't
rush.
We're
good until 12:55.
Okay, excellent. So again, to summarize, consent is FRIES. So we kind of talked a bit about the scenes of the sexual situations that we're getting in media, and we wanted to break it down into 3 different types of consent messages we are getting. We mentioned how more recently, in like the last maybe couple of years, we have been seeing consent portrayed very healthy and in a positive way in media. I think it was previously very, very problematic, but here's the type of message that we get about consent in media. It's an enthusiastic yes, but it should be, right? Best case scenario. And so from the scenes that we've discussed, what are some phrases that people use to ask if the other person wanted to do something more physical, something more sexual? Along those lines, what were the signals that made it clear? So what were the words that were said? What were the signals that made it clear that the other person was also interested? And then, we'll talk about how realistic those scenarios are that we see in the media. So the enthusiastic yes, I'm all for it. No doubt in my mind that this is a yes, right? So your scene, your scenario, Taylor, that was the the sexual education one,
so
right?
in that scene, they were facing each other, they were standing looking at each other, and the girl asked, "Can I kiss you?" And he said yes. And then she also asked, "Can you remove your clothes?" And he said yes. So they were they were asking questions to each other, and the questions are yes and no questions. There's no in between anything like that. So it was very verbal, very clear questions to see how other people, how each other was feeling about something.
Great. Yeah. The scene that I mentioned from Booksmart, which I think it's super funny movie. The scene where Amy's starting to have sex with the mean girl in the bathroom. I really liked how they are both checking in with. It's not just
Right.
one person's job to check in, right? But they're both checking in. And so at some point, I mentioned how mean girl starts taking off her clothes and Amy starts helping her. They laugh about it. So that's kind of the nonverbal cues, right? But then they start kissing, and it's Amy's first time, so she's very nervous, and she gets dizzy, and so she stops kissing her, and she actually says, "I just got dizzy," and then Mean Girl says, "We can stop if you want." And Amy says, "No, we're not stopping," right? So that's another verbal confirmation that they're gonna move forward, right? And they're both really into it. And then so then they finish taking the mean girl's clothes, and then Amy just sits there and is like, "Oh, I guess I should take mine off too, right?" And then the mean girl says yes. So that's another check-in that they did where they're both an enthusiastic yes for what's coming and where they're heading. And I think there's one more in which they um, I think they're talking about like they're talking through it, like this is my first time, and Mean Girl is like, oh, it's okay. So I really like how they're both taking turns to check in with each other, and they're both giving an enthusiastic
Right.
yes.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you brought up. It is both partners' responsibility to check in with each other, most definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, how realistic are these scenes? I don't know. What do y'all think? Are these realistic scenes where they're both checking in each other? And and now I'll love to hear from the audience in the chat room. But what was really good about seeing this in the media is that yes, it was a little bit awkward, but also kind of sweet, and it felt like it wasn't. That it was a very sweet scene, and that they both cared about each other. That they both care about making the other person feel comfortable, so that they can
Yeah,
enjoy themselves.
I too love seeing these enthusiastic yeses. We do have a comment in the chat. This probably goes more into an enthusiastic no, but Scotty Young said, sadly, many times they are realistic in the sense that people often don't make a point to get consent. Sometimes sex scenes are unrealistic because they don't show the awkwardness in communication that often happens between a couple, especially in their first sexual experience together. So yeah, that was to a point that we were at a couple slides ago about how realistic the sex scenes that we do see in media are. And it is unfortunate that a lot of times we don't get that consent and we don't see that on screen, and unfortunately that is the reality a lot of the time. So thank you for that comment. That's great.
Yes, and that's why it's so important that media represents good ways, the positive ways to get consent, right? Healthy ways to get consent, and how in a realistic way, right? And not in a way that it's just going for the laughs or the awkwardness, or that it's going for the entertainment piece of it, right? But it shows that this realistically, this is what healthy consent could look like. So yeah, we'll get to the definitive no in a second. So, but thank you for bringing that up because it is an important part of the discussion. So what are some words? What are some phrases that people can use to ask the other person if they want to do something more physical, more sexual? What about do you want to make out? Right? That's one way. What about do you want to cuddle? Right? If cuddle is exactly what you want to do and not code for something else. Do you want to cuddle? Right? And that's what we meant by clear messages. Like it's not like a sub-hidden a code for something else, but that is actually what you're saying. It's a clear message. Or like with how Amy in the movie Booksmart said, should I take off my shirt? Right? And then the mean girl said yes. Okay. Then let's jump into the definitive no. And some of the scenes that we've been discussing, what are some of the phrases that people use to kind of point to the fact that maybe they don't want to do something physical, something sexual? What are the phrases and what are the signals that are made that made it clear that the other person was not interested? And then what is, in the scenes that we discuss again, what is the reaction of the asker when
We
they
have
get a
another
no?
great phrase for enthusiastic
So,
guests. Beth said, create a code word with your partner. That's great. So maybe you don't necessarily want to say those words about like, oh, do you want to engage in this? But let's say pineapple is your word, like if your partner says pineapple, then that means yes. That's great. I like that a lot. Really, really cool. Sorry, Samantha, go ahead. We were talking about signals, definitive no's that we saw in our media scenes. The one that I was talking about from the show Sex Education, the boy actually gets like visibly uncomfortable and starts like kind of not engaging in the same way, like he's not reciprocating anything and he's just kind of frozen, and then the girl pulls away and like asks him what's wrong. But that sometimes it's not someone saying no like out loud, it's like the way that their body looks and like the way, like sometimes people like dissociate when they're uncomfortable and things like that. So that's the example that I had from my TV show.
yeah, yeah. And so one thing that Taylor and I talked about when we were preparing for the workshop is how much this lack of consent and definitive no messages are actually played by men in media, because the media is kind of perpetuating this idea that men will never say no to sex or to do something physical. But I actually do have a scenario from a definitive no given by a male, and that's from the movie Plus One. And in that movie, it kind of looks like an indie film, but it's in that movie. It's two friends, a guy and a girl who have known each other since college, and they go to this wedding together. They end up sharing a room as they attended the wedding, and it's a one bed room. So but they're friends, and so they're sleeping in the same bed. And she just recently broke up with someone, so she's feeling kind of lonely. And so it's the middle of the night, and she starts inching towards his side of the bed. And he wakes up. He's like, "What are you doing?" And she says, "I want to cuddle." And he says, "No, I don't want to cuddle with you." Um, and she says, "It's just cuddling." And he says, "Don't you like?" She says, "Don't you like cuddling?" And he says, "I love cuddling. I don't want to cuddle with you." Um, and she goes, "Oh, but it's just cuddling." And he says, "No, no, because if I get aroused, you're never gonna let me live that down. And if I don't get aroused, then I'm gonna make you feel ugly. So no, I can't win with this." And she looks at him and is like, "What's wrong with you?" She's like, and he says, "I don't want to cuddle with you." So I like that scene because again, whether it's actual cuddling or the implied a meaning behind the meaning of what happens in cuddling or during cuddling, but he gave a definitive no. And he said, "I like cuddling, but I just don't want to do it with you," right? So I like that scene that where there's a definitive
I really
no
like that too, and I also like that it's just such a great point that consent doesn't just have to do with sex. It can be any sort of thing that any type of behavior that you have with another person. Like I was telling Samantha the other day that sometimes like you can say no to hand holding, you can say no to cuddling. It's like you have bodily autonomy and you can say no to anything. You have consent to engage in a conversation, so there, like this can apply to so many different types of behaviors and interactions that you have with other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. So then, what are some phrases that people have used to give a definitive no? What about, "I don't think I want to do that"? You know, we talked about, you can stop at any time, right? So you can say, can we stop? Sometimes people don't feel comfortable saying, can we stop? Another phrase that people use to say a definitive no when they don't feel comfortable saying, can we stop, is that doesn't feel good, right? And also pay attention to the body language, the nonverbal cues, right? Someone jerking away, someone not kissing you back, someone staying frozen there, someone not collaborating with what's going on, right? They're just frozen. In the enthusiastic yes scenes that we talked about, they're both girls were contributing to unclothing, right? So that's more of an enthusiastic yes than a definitive no when someone is just frozen, right? So those are the verbal and nonverbal cues. Anything
We just have
else you
some
want to add
things
to
in the
that,
chat.
Taylor?
Beth says you can say red light or green light for something. I like that a lot. Or and then Crystal said,
Yes.
I just don't want to. So that can be, a good reason for why you don't want to engage anymore. You don't want to, go past something or try something else. So yeah, those are great. Thank you guys for the chat.
Crystal, that's a great point, because you don't have to justify why you don't want. I just don't want to, right? That should be reason enough, and that is the definitive no. Yes. All right. So then we have unclear messages. We talked about how an enthusiastic yes is know that in your mind that is an enthusiastic yes. And then a definitive no, what that could sound like or look like, right? And then sometimes we have unclear messages. And there might be some phrases that provide like mixed messages or unclear messages about what's going to happen or whether the other person is into it or not. There are verbal and non-verbal signals that made it clear that maybe the other person is not comfortable or unsure, right? And then what was the asker's reaction for being unsure about where their partner needed or where their partner was emotionally, physically, and all of that, right? Yeah, so let's see. Any messages from media about where there's unclear? I do have one from that. Also, that movie, the Plus One movie. The main guy, he's in a wedding, and he was very excited about bumping into someone from his past. And so and I forget her name, Remy or whatever. And so he was very excited to bump into her, and they talked, and then they danced, and now he's walking her to her car, and he leans in for the kiss, and she jumps back, and he said, "Oh, sorry, did I misread what was going on?" And she says, "I'm engaged," and shows him her ring, and he says, "Oh, was that there the whole time?" And of course, they're doing it for entertainment. The whole scene, how it plays out, they're doing it for entertainment value. But at the same time, he says it later on, like, she touched me a lot for someone who's engaged. I was getting mixed messages. And so, sometimes there are, and again, sometimes in media, they're played off for laughs and entertainment value, but there are both verbal and non-verbal cues that maybe there are unclear messages about whether the other person is into it or not, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, that example is great, and that situation probably could have been avoided if he read the room a little bit better, and if he did try to get that enthusiastic yes early on and not just assume that they were both on the same page. Definitely.
Right. He didn't get that verbal confirmation, right? He just
and just because just because you're feeling a certain way, and like someone might be touchy or like hugging you or something like that, that's not a yes. That's definitely not a yes. That does not mean that you're on the same page. You have to talk about that first. Right.
Someone could be just friendly. And again, both on the guy coming from a guy who's just being friendly, or coming from
Right.
a girl who's just being friendly. But because he didn't get that verbal confirmation, he could have just said, "Can I kiss you?" And then it wouldn't have gotten so awkward, right? So other unclear messages. Taylor and I talked a little bit about this, the Netflix and chill code that people were using or still using. I'm not sure. I think when it first came out, it was really it was confusing for some folks. Like, what do you mean Netflix and chill? And of course, had to be explained what that really meant. But it's kind of an unclear message, just because most people understand what Netflix and chill means doesn't mean that everybody understands what that entails, right? So it's a little bit of
Are you really going to watch Netflix, or is Netflix going to be playing in the background? You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Right. You can get that verbal confirmation and just clarify, like you said,
Right.
Taylor, clarify what's going to happen, right? Or saying something like, "I'm interested in something else." Well, what exactly is that something else? Is it making out, or is it removing clothes, or just being more clear about what you're interested in. But also pay attention to that tone of voice when when you say, "Are you into it?" When you ask, "Are you into it?" and they say like, "Yeah," that might be a tone of voice that is not an enthusiastic yes, right? So do they seem hesitant? Do they seem uncomfortable? Right? Is their tone of voice kind of relaying those things? Then yeah, that could be an unclear message. It's definitely not a no, and it's definitely not a yes. So you need to kind of dig in a little bit more, right?
I'm just checking in the time really quick. We have about 15 minutes left, and we have some really great questions in the chat. So I want to make sure that we can get to those at the end. We're gonna keep moving along. Thank you guys so much for staying with us and being really active in the chat. You guys are great.
Yes. So really, just to kind of start wrapping up this conversation, is that media is entertainment. It's not reality. Some of the scenes that are over romanticized, or again, they're going for the laughs. But creating a culture of healthy consent is about talking to others about what consent, the kind of consent that we want to see in real life. So you can be the star of your own healthy consent scene, right? Not just by acting, or not by acting, but like actually doing the kind of consent, healthy consent that you want in your life, that you want in your life, but also by talking about it. Oh, did I go too fast? Okay, so yeah, let's start talking about consent. And again, since it's all over media, we can definitely take those teaching moments or those conversation moments to kind of unpack a little bit more about what happened there regarding consent. So because we definitely have to counteract some of the harmful messages that we're getting from media, or the absent consent messages that we're getting from media. Some of the ways that you can do that, again, is to talk to your friends and family, right? You can start talking to them about it. If you're an adult, a parent, a teacher, a counselor in this session, you can use some of the tools that we talked about. If you're a teen, talk to your family about it. If you see a scene where consent was not given, call it out, right? Oh, they Mr. Black Panther just leaned in for the kiss and didn't ask, "Could I kiss you?" He later justified it and said, "I just almost died. That's why I leaned in for the kiss," right? But he leaned in. He didn't ask for it. He didn't ask before that. He didn't get consent.
I think that that's really great just to start the conversation. Aaron had a question that says, "How can you teach teens how to react when consent isn't given, when the media portrays non-consent as acceptable?" So what you just said, Samantha, is great about pointing it out if it's not okay. Like, just start that conversation, and you can develop an environment where you can have those conversations, and you guys can, go through it together. Like, if you have a young person, just let them, like, whenever you see something in the media, you can point it out as a negative example. So then they will have that as an example, in their toolbox, so they can identify it later if anything ever happens to them.
Yeah, there's something called the consent test for media, and there's a couple of things that need to happen. Like, so if these things happen in that scene, then it passes the consent test, and that is that consent has to be given verbally. Again, that is the best way to get consent, so that you know that it's an enthusiastic yes, and not like those mixed messages or unclear messages, right? Consent is given verbally or asked for verbally, right? There's no coercion involved, no violence, no threat, no pressure. And people ask multiple times. Again, they're both engaged in getting consent, right? So that's two. There's no threats, no coercion involved. None of the characters are
That's a big
intoxicated.
one, yeah.
That's three, right? So if one of the characters is intoxicated, that's not consent. We talked about it, right? And then again, each of the characters are involved in giving a verbal or nonverbal cues that they want to have sex. So when you have a sexual tension scene and one of those things is not present, then it doesn't pass the consent test, right? So you can make it into a game.
Yeah, I imagine just having a little scorecard while you're watching TV. I could definitely get with that.
Right. Because it's definitely there's definitely a lot of movies out there that are great, very over romanticized, but there's no consent, and that kind of puts it's just like they didn't get consent. It kind of puts it's a shame. And of course, we talked about how there's a lot of examples of that. Only more recently, we've been getting some good examples of consent. And before we wrap up today, really, we want to talk about, we've been talking about healthy consent and all of that, but then we should also talk about sexual coercion. And the lack of consent can show up in patterns in different kinds of patterns of different kinds of behaviors. Of course, sexual coercion is manipulating someone into having sex, either by using drugs or alcohol, or saying that you owe them, that maybe you don't love them anymore, ignoring your needs and boundaries, and just focusing on their own. Sexting, it can be kind of like asking for a sexy picture, and why not? Don't you love me? I miss you. I want to feel closer to you, and kind of coercing into, if you don't feel comfortable or not ready to sext, then that's kind of the sexual coercion piece of it. And of course, pregnancy coercion, let's have a kid, let's have a child. Birth control sabotage can be, messing with the birth control pills or punching holes in condoms. So removing, again, your control over your own, you've decided you're with birth control, you may be trying to protect your own body. And so this person is trying to remove that control over your bodily autonomy. So it's important to see also what sexual coercion looks like in real life, because as we've been talking about today, some of this sexual tensions in scenes that we're learning from are not very realistic. So we have to also talk about what it looks like when in real life.
I want to touch on the birth control. Something that people don't really talk about a lot is that it's not always a male sabotaging birth control. It could also be someone who's taking birth control and lying about it. So like they tell you that they're on birth control and then they're not. I've seen that a lot recently. And then also, since we have a lot of parents in the chat, adults in the chat right now, I do want to highlight that the sexting thing has totally heightened. And since we're all in lockdown and lots of people can't see their friends, a lot of digital abuse is occurring, and people are pressuring their partners to engage in more sexting activities and sending more pictures and, just trying to engage with people that way. So that is something that I suggest you, touch on and highlight and let your young person know that just because you haven't seen your boyfriend in 6 months doesn't mean you have to do anything over the phone, because that stuff never goes away. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so just to sum up again, it's not a mood killer to ask for consent. I'm giving you here again the the acronym for FRIES, of what is consent. And again, just to remind ourselves that, that some of the scenes that we constantly see in the media are lack consent. And we need to have, we need to keep the discussion going. So in conclusion, again, media messages lack the consent, healthy consent. So it makes it hard for us to learn about what healthy consent can look like. And if consent is really given, then people won't learn how to talk about it. So we need to, now that you've attended this workshop, we need to have conversations about what healthy consent looks like. To talk to your friends and talk to your family, and to also talk about how realistic or unrealistic those themes are. So just to kind of get them thinking about what consent, healthy consent could look like. If you want to learn more about, PADV and what we do or work, this is one of the conversations we have with teens. Don't forget to sign up for our next Teen Summit in October. And then here's our information. There is a text line for dating violence and relationships, young people relationships in Georgia, and that's that number that shows up there, the 706 number. And if you're a young person, you can text them about anything, not just about dating violence. You can text them about relationships, jealousy in the relationship, consent, anything. You can text them about anything. And of course, there's our information. Are there any last questions that we want to touch on before
I think we have 2 or 3 in the chat that I wanted to look at. Chelsea asked, does consent look different after you've been in a relationship for a long time? Absolutely. We touched on this just a little bit. Like I said, just because it's happened before doesn't mean it's going to happen every single time. And even if you're in a really long-term relationship and you guys love each other and you don't, things are going great, you still have to check in with each other, and you do still have the autonomy and the ability to say no at any time whatsoever.
Yeah, even if you get married, it's still a sign of a healthy relationship to check in with each other. I think once you've been in a relationship for a long time, you kind of learn more about the other person's likes and dislikes and their cues. But if they want to stop because they're uncomfortable, maybe they're not up for it, that night, then, again, a sign of a healthy relationship is that you should be able to stop without, the other person getting angry or
absolutely
lashing
Angela
out.
had a really good question. She said, so if I say no, how do I handle the awkwardness afterwards? So that is definitely a reason that a lot of people don't say no and they don't say anything. But if your partner really appreciates you and respects you, then they're going to be happier that you said no and you feel comfortable, and you guys can, try again another time, whenever you're more comfortable. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, exactly. I think it is part of that conversation. I liked in one of the scenes where he said, where he was saying no, he's like, I like cuddling, I just don't want to do it with you. I mean, that's kind of similar, right? It could, if the reason for the no is like, no, I don't want to do this all together, but we could look into some other things, or no, I don't want to do it right now, even though we've done it before. That is part of the, if you're in a relationship, in a loving, healthy relationship with this person, it's just part of the conversation, and you can help normalize that, right? You can help help normalize the fact that you're both talking about consent. Absolutely. Right? I don't know. Does it make sense and help answer the question?
I think that was great. We are about to wrap up. If you guys have any last questions, drop them in the chat really quick. And also, you can send any other questions that you have that you want answered into our Instagram, Teens Against Dating Violence, and someone will get back to you.
Thank you guys for coming today. We loved having you and hearing your feedback.
Yeah, thank you guys. Go take a quick break, and we will be back for session 2 at 1:05.